Hi, this is Jeff at Slavens Racing. This video is about how to do a top-end rebuild on a KTM 250 or 300, which would also apply to a Husaberg or a Husqvarna, the late model Husqvarna 250, 300 as well, because they're all the same engine. So first of all, I'll go over some of the tools that you need so you can have those on hand to do the job properly. And tools are an investment, so if you don't have what you need, then I would suggest you go buy a few things. So we'll start over here with the dead blow hammer. This is something great to have in your toolbox. You know, it's got little beads on the inside, and then it's rubber coated on the outside. Then a couple of T-handles. I've got an 8 and a 10. I've got a gasket scraper, a 13 millimeter box end here. This is a 13 millimeter ratchet and extension. I've got a flat blade screwdriver. I've got a small ratchet, which I use these small ones all the time. So this small ratchet and this piece go together. This has got a screwdriver type handle on it, and then this goes into the end. And I use this tool constantly. I use it for Torx, and I use it for sockets. So this is a T25 Torx, and this is a 6 millimeter socket that you'll need for this job. 10 millimeter wrench. This is a pry bar, and I'm just going to use this end of it. An X-Acto knife for scraping gaskets also. And then those pliers for installing the easy clips, and a spring tool for removing the pipe. So first of all, you need to remove some of the peripheral items like the seat and the gas tank, so you can get to this, and then the pipe, so that you can get down to the motor. I've already removed the pipe. If you don't know how to do that, we do have a video on pipe installations that would cover that, but it's a pretty easy process to take a pipe off. So now we've got the motor exposed, and you need to, first of all, drain the coolant, which is this bolt right here. It's also got a copper washer on the back side of it. Make sure you don't lose that. You can reuse that washer. It does not need to be replaced every time. And I typically get this bolt about loosened up with the 10 millimeter T-handle and get it to where it's about ready to fall out. Hold the pan up underneath it. Then I remove the cap on top, so that the vacuum of it kind of holds it until I get it all in position, and then once I remove the cap, the fluid will start coming out. So drain the fluid, and then put the bolt back in. And the next step would be to remove this power valve cover. I've already removed these screws, and that's what this 25 Torx is for. That's what these screws are right here. Those have already been removed, just to speed it up for the video. And then this cover slides straight out, and it fits over this rubber piece here, so you can't really move it up. You got to slide it out. And then you can just get this gasket out of the way. And then there's a circlip, or it's not really a circlip, it's some type of a clip that's on this rod that keeps this ball and rod in place. And it'd be fairly easy to drop it down inside this passageway here that goes down into the shift linkage area. So I'd recommend that you cover that up with a little piece of a paper towel. Maybe stuff it in there a little bit. Then you can just get on the back side of this clip with a flat blade screwdriver, and then it rotates out. We've also got a separate video on this. So then we've got the clip, and then you can just pry and pop that off of there. So now this paper towel can come back out. And then you can push the power valve, and you need to get to this nut right there, but you can't because the linkage is in the way, so push it up out of the way. Then I just loosen these, about a quarter of a turn. And then I go to the other side and I loosen them about the same. While we're here, I'll show you that you need to remove this head stay, which is what this is called. It's a motor mount plate. And I've already removed the bolts. And then it needs to come out so that we can remove the head. Maybe you can move over here for just a little bit. So now The coolant's been drained, so you need to take this front hose off. You don't have to take it off, but it's definitely much easier to get the cylinder up and out, and it's definitely easier to install the cylinder back onto the piston if you get this out of the way. So I've removed the clamps, and I'm just going to push down on it in the middle, and then it comes right out. This hose that goes to the head, you can do the same thing with it. Just push on the hose and pop it loose. You do not need to take it off at the top. And then take the spark plug cap off and remove all your bolts here, the head bolts. Now I don't remove, I do like I did down here. I loosen them all about a quarter of a turn. That kind of gives even pressure on the release. And then once I get them all a quarter turn, then I'll go around and do them all another quarter turn, and then from there you can just unscrew them. But I don't like to leave one side completely tight and the other side completely loose. I think that can distort the head or the cylinder and possibly cause a sealing issue later. So I typically don't do that. So now that we've got the bolts out of here, these tend to be stuck on here. And this one's not bad, but if they're stuck, you can just take this pry bar and stick it in here and just pop it loose. Now you can do that with a round screwdriver or a number of different devices, but I don't like to use, if I'm prying on something, I want to use a prying device. To me, screwdrivers are for screwing things, not for prying. So anyhow, this comes off. And then there's two pins up here that you want to make sure that they're intact. They could either be stuck in the head or in the cylinder. Just don't want to lose them so they don't fall down in someplace and cause damage. Just keep track of those. And then the head can be set aside for now. Then from here we need to move to the other side. And on this side, in order to get to this front cylinder nut, you've got to remove the starter motor. So the first thing you should do before you remove the starter motor is to unhook the negative battery terminal so that this is not a live wire. So right at the moment it's hot, it's got juice going to it, and if you bump it on the cylinder or something, you're going to blow a fuse or possibly cause some other damage. So up here on the top, I unbolt the battery cable, the negative battery terminal, and then I just tuck it in underneath the rubber strap here that holds the battery in so that it's definitely out of the way. And back down here, loosen this nut, this main cable going to the electric starter motor. That requires a 10mm wrench. Pull the cable up. So now the cable's not hot, so you don't have to worry about it. Now this motor, sometimes they'll push right out, but that's what I have the dead blow hammer here for. It's just a tap on it. But it would help first if I took the bolts out. Got a little ahead of myself there for the video. We'll see if it'll push out. Yes, it will. Quite often they're stuck in there and you have to tap them out. And this one's still kind of stuck. There we go, so it's out. Now we can get to this cover. I've already taken the other two bolts out. These gaskets should be replaced on these covers. And this goo that's in here is totally normal. Guys freak out about this all the time. I'm constantly getting emails about this. Something's wrong with my bike. It's got goo in there. No, that's totally normal. That's just byproduct of the two-stroke mix. Combined with the burnt mixture. That's nothing to worry about. So now you can take this nut all the way off. kind of slippery because it's got that glue on it. And you can just stay there. I'm going to run to the other side and take the other two nuts off real quick. So now all four cylinder nuts are off, so the cylinder is ready to be removed. Now sometimes they get stuck, but this one's not. But if they are stuck, you can use your dead blow hammer, and you can just hit them right on the side, like this, bam. Doesn't hurt anything to hit them like that. This one is not stuck. So I'm going to lift it straight up, and push the piston down at the same time. Push the hose out of the way. Now the cylinder's off. So now it's time to inspect everything. So I'm going to pull the piston back up. I might have to use the Kickstarter to get it started there. I can see I've got a good layer of two-stroke oil down here on the crankshaft. That's totally normal. Get questions about that too. It's just what it does. It puddles up on the bottom. And this piston's got about 85 hours on it with AMS oil at between 80 and 100 to 1. The AMS oil Sabre. And this piston's in excellent shape. It actually doesn't need to be replaced. But I like to keep my engines really fresh. And so every 80 or 90 hours, somewhere in that range, I usually change out the piston because I can feel them falling off the power just a little bit, and I want my motors nice and tight and fresh. So this is in excellent shape. So from here you can pull the piston off. Go over that real quick. Find the tool. For that I just use an ice pick type of a tool. And I'd recommend that you stuff down in here with paper or a rag so that the clip doesn't fall down in there. And the pistons have these grooves in them right here, and those are designed to get a hold of the clip. So you stick your device in there and pry the clip out. So there's one clip. And I should be able to just reach over around the other side here and push this out. It doesn't want to cooperate. So let's move to the other side for a moment. So on this side I'm going to remove the clip as well, the circlip. Then this is just my 3/8 drive extension. I'm going to push on it with that. This one doesn't fit very well, so I'm going to find something else to push on it with. This one's a little more stuck than normal. So I'm holding the piston towards me while I'm tapping on it there so that I'm not putting any pressure on the rod, any lateral pressure on the rod. So, because the piston it moves back and forth on the rod, so it's got clearance there, so I hold it towards me while I tap on it like that. So now the piston's off. And this is all pretty normal wear. It's got a slight scuff here that might have been just a little heat issue. It could have been a little piece of dirt that went through. It's hard to say. This wear here is totally normal. It's got a little bit of blow by here, which is normal for this amount of hours. This looks very good for 85 hours. It's got a clean burning pattern on the top. That's a totally normal pattern, this being the exhaust side. And there's very little carbon buildup. That's one of the things I really love about the AMSOIL. So the next part of this video, we're going to cover reassembly. Okay, so after getting the cylinder removed, the dirty work starts. It's the biggest pain in the butt part of the job, and that is cleaning the gasket surfaces and cleaning up the cylinder and all the other components here. The cleaning will take a big chunk out of the job. It's time consuming to get everything nice and clean, and it's very important. So I remove the cylinder and I take it over to my bench, and I scraped and cleaned the gasket surfaces. I use an X-Acto knife and a gasket scraper and a piece of Scotch-Brite, to screen Scotch-Brite, and I clean up the gasket surfaces here and on the cases. And as I mentioned before, I use the AMSOIL Sabre at 80, sometimes 100 to 1, and so my power valves are spotless in here, and I'm not going to take them apart and go through that. Sorry, but I don't like taking things apart just for the fun of it. So maybe at a later point I'll make a video on cleaning power valves, but not today. So anyhow, the cylinder is all clean and ready to go. Also on the inside of the bore, you know, they always have some little brown spots. That's just a little carbon that gets on there, and it can be in little patches, or it can be in little streaks, or whatever it is. It's a total non-issue. So all you have to do is buff it out of there with a little Scotch-Brite. Also at the top of the cylinder, they tend to get a little ring around the top here, so you want to buff that out of there with your Scotch-Brite. And then there's also a hole in the cylinder right here. Hopefully you can see that in the video. It's only like 2 millimeters in diameter, and that is a bleed hole for the exhaust port. It bleeds off some of the compression at kicking speeds or electric starter speeds. So it bleeds just enough off so that the bike will start easier and won't put strain on the starter or the kickstarter, on the electric starter or kickstarter. So you want to make sure that that hole is clean. There's no carbon built up in it. If you've got if the rest of your motor is real carboned up, the top of the piston, the exhaust port, etc., well, chances are that's plugged up as well and needs to be cleaned. And if it's plugged, they definitely start harder. So after you've got all this clean, these surfaces clean, the base gasket clean, the bore clean, the ports, your power, make sure your power valve is working smoothly. It's time to reassemble, but just a minute before we get to that part, you need to do a little check here on the rod. Guys call me about this quite often. All rods have to have side-to-side play. That's how they get lubrication into the bearing. So if you push it right here, side to side, you probably can't see it very well in this video, but if you push it side to side, it definitely moves. And if you were to measure it down here where the thrust washer meets the rod, it should have around 16 to 18, maybe even 20 thousandths clearance side to side. So you can actually slide the rod back and forth on the crankshaft pin. So what you don't want is any up and down play. So like this, up and down, no play there. So you kind of have to wiggle it back and forth and figure out where the middle of that wiggle is, and hold it right there and see if you can lift the rod up and down. This one's perfectly tight, which is how they should be, and if there is a little clunk in there, you have to make a judgment call. If there's a little bit, that's probably okay, but if it's more than just a hair, then the rod needs to be replaced, or the whole crankshaft. That cranks on KTMs usually last a long time. I mean, I see them go 400 or 500 hours quite commonly. Now I'm going to use I've got my base gasket already on here, and this is a 0.4. You can use a 0.4 if you're at low elevation. I'm at 6,000 feet, and I ride from 7 to 11,000 feet, sometimes 12. But if you're, say, below 4,000 feet, you probably want to stick with the gasket thickness that came with. If you've got a machined head, if you've got a stock head, you can go to this 0.4 gasket with no problem at all. But if you've got a machined head, one of our S3 mule heads or one of our SX mule heads, all those, the compression is going to get pretty questionable, too high for low elevation, below 4,000 feet. So I would typically use a thicker base gasket, at least the 0.5 and probably the stock setup, which is a 0.4 and a 0.2 stacked together. Now when you take your engine apart, if it's never been apart before, if you bought the bike new and you know it's never been apart, you should measure the gaskets with a pair of calipers. And it should measure around 0.6 of a millimeter. And there will be two gaskets stacked together. There's always, always, always two gaskets stacked together. And guys come in saying, oh no, my bike just had one. Well, that's wrong. If you take a little time and dig into the side of the gasket with your fingernail and try to pull it apart, you'll see that there's two gaskets on there. It's usually a 2/10 and a 4/10, which add up to 0.6. So now we're ready to install the new piston. And I put the rings on before I put the piston on the rod. And the rings on the 300s, well actually on all of them, have, let's see here, they usually have a letter on the top. Let's see if these do. Okay, so this one's got an N right there. This one has an N there. So the letter goes up. Now these are a flat ring. So it means they're flat as a pancake. So you can put them on upside down, it really doesn't matter. But I put them on the way the manufacturer says, and that's with the letter up. Now the 300s use a flat ring. Some years of 250s use a tapered ring. So that means one side of it's flat, the other side of it's tapered. And if you put them on upside down, they won't go in all the way. So these, you can push them into where they're flush with the piston, with the side of the piston. On a tapered ring, if you got it in upside down, it will not go in, and you'll have a really difficult time getting the cylinder to slide over it as well. So look for that stamp on the ring and have the letter up. Or you could have the wrong rings on a 250 and might have some issue there. If you do, give us a call, we'll help you sort it out. So I've put a little lubricant on this small end rod bearing. The big end's got plenty of lube already on it. I put a new bearing in here, so I put just a little lubricant on it. It's really not even necessary because as soon as you touch that electric starter or the kickstarter, a fog of premix covers everything and lubricates it instantly. So it's really not that important. But if it makes you feel good, go ahead and do it. I also put the pistons on dry. I don't put any lube on this pin. That's a total waste of time. What I do is I put the clips, the circlip on one side of the piston before I ever set it up on the rod there. Might as well get one of them done down here where it's easier to do it. So this pin slides in and out very easily. I'm just going to back it off to where it's got this, so to where it's not in this hole, this gap here. And bring the rod over here. Sometimes you might have to go to the other side of the bike to line this up properly. Okay, so now I've got the pin in there, I've got the clip on the back side. At this point, you need to put a rag around here so that you don't drop the circlip in the cases. I'm using our easy clips. The factory clips don't have these tangs on them and they're very difficult to install. I guarantee if you use them, you will gouge up the side of the piston big time. And if you do that, it's not the end of the world. You can just take a file and touch it up. This piston here was actually one that was sent back by a customer because it had just a little ding on the edge of it. He thought it was a big, huge issue, and I just touched it up with a file. It took me about 2 seconds, and it's going on my bike. So if you ever have a piston that's got just a little ding on it somewhere, it's a total non-issue. It has no effect whatsoever on the performance or the reliability of the product. So now I'm going to use needle nose pliers and put this circlip in here. And shot back at me. So I'd wear safety glasses if I were you. actually easier if you do it on the other side where you don't have this starter piece here in your way. This is a little bit awkward like this. So now it's in the groove, and I'm going to check it by grabbing one of the tangs and turning it back and forth. And then I want the gap of the clip. The gap of the clip. I want that gap either at the very top or the very bottom. And the reason for that is that the piston stops at the bottom, stops at the top. It just constantly stops, stop, stop, stop. And with each one of those stops, the clip at real high RPM can tend to want to flex in, and it could pop out and damage everything. So that's in there perfectly. And now I'll carefully pull this rag out here. You gotta be careful because I probably should have waited to put this gasket on here. I got a little bit ahead of myself here. So I'm gonna pull this out without damaging the gasket. And I'm gonna rotate the crank slightly to lower the piston. Okay, so now it's time to put the cylinder on. This hose is a little bit in the way, but not a big deal. I've got a separate video on how to do this, in case you want to review it. Now, let me back up a little bit here. So at the very back of the piston, in the ring grooves, so the grooves where the rings fit, in the back of the piston here, there are locating pins to keep the rings from rotating. On a two-stroke, if the rings rotate, they will hang up in one of the ports and blow the engine up. So it's very important to have those pins in place. And I've seen guys get the ring on top of the pin and then force the cylinder on and push the pin in, and then the motor blows up later. And of course, at that point, they claim that they got a faulty piston, which is not true and will not be warranted. So, squeeze the piston rings with one hand and slide the cylinder down with the other hand. So I used a screwdriver to push the ring in to make sure it was in the groove all the way, because I've got this hose on here. I probably should have taken that off because it's made it a little more awkward. Now it should just drop right down. Then I'm going to double check that it's installed correctly by turning it over with the Kickstarter. Just want to make sure that it moves over nice and slowly. If the rings were out of position and I had forced it down, it would have wanted to lift the cylinder up, or it would have drugged when I kicked it over. So from here, it's just kind of backtracking from what we did before. You're going to want to put the cylinder nuts on. Or just stay there. And then tighten the nuts. This is something I get a question on quite often is how to torque these. So I'm going to go from corner to corner. So first I did this corner over here, and I'm doing that one. I'm just slightly snugging them. I'm going to do this corner. So you're doing an X pattern, corner to corner. I'm going to do this one. So this is a large stud. It's a 10mm stud. It can take a lot of torque. You could look it up, but I would imagine the torque setting on is about 30 foot-pounds, but I do not torque them. The only way you can do it is with one of those claw devices. And then you have to use a formula, and I don't really believe that that works very well. And It's not something you're going to strip. You don't have to worry about that. If you're a torqueaholic, you might have to take a pill and get over it. Just snug them up good. And then you need to get them pretty tight. Now this is a fairly long wrench, and I'm going to have my hand towards the end of it. I'm going to put a fair amount of pressure on it because they are big studs and they can handle a lot of torque. And I basically just tighten them until they feel like they don't want to tighten anymore. And I'm sure that's going to be really close to the torch setting. So that part's done. So now it's time to put in the head O-rings, and sometimes they don't fit perfectly. This one actually looks like it's going to fit perfectly. Because sometimes they're maybe just a hair too small and you might have to stretch them a little. And then sometimes maybe they're just a little bit twisted or something, and you can take grease and put in this groove. You can put grease all the way around both grooves and then set the O-ring in there, and that will hold the O-ring in place while you install the head. And it can be just any kind of grease, wheel bearing grease, whatever, it doesn't matter. So these are laying in there very nicely, so I'm just going to go with it the way it is. Double check, make sure you've got these locating pins here. If you happen to have lost one of those, it's not a big deal. You can install it with one. All they do is help to locate the heads, so you get it on there perfectly. But if you've got one, it still will locate it with the addition of the bolts. And then you should replace these copper washers. And these bolts get really dry and kind of corroded from the coolant, and so in order for them to torque properly, you should put just a little bit of grease on them, just any kind of a light grease, like a lithium, a seal grease, a wheel bearing grease, anything, and just put just a hair of it on there. I've got some on there and you probably can't even see it. Okay, so now it's time to install the head. We've got the O-ring sitting in there. Like I said before, you can use grease to hold them in. And the heads have always got carbon on them. It's totally normal, and I don't get real carried away. As you can see here, I don't buff it out and make it all shiny and look like new again, because it really doesn't matter. It's a total waste of my time and energy, because as soon as the motor starts, it's going to get a layer of carbon right back on it. So within a couple miles down the trail, the thing's going to have carbon on it. If you want to waste your time polishing it to the max, go right ahead, but I don't do that. So from here, if you've got your locating pins, you can use those to drop the head on. Or if you don't have those pins, you can use the bolts to line it up. So from there, we just backtrack what we did before. And I'm not going to go over all those details. You just put all your bolts on the head. Use an X pattern, just snug them down a little bit with a wrench and snug them down a little bit more. Then get out your torque wrench and bring them up to, say, the setting is 18 foot-pounds. You should bring them up to part way, like 10 to 12 foot-pounds on all of them in an X pattern. And then bring it back to 18 foot-pounds. I would also put a new spark plug in at that time. BR7EIX is what should be used in 250s and 300s. That's an NGK brand that we carry. And then you're going to want to put your covers back on. You should put some grease on these power valve gears. Just some light grease, doesn't take much, because it gets all that goo in there fairly quickly. That lubricates it. Hook your power valve linkage up on the other side. We've got a separate video on that. And obviously bolt everything back together, just backtrack. Put coolant in the engine and you're ready to go. Hope this video helps. That's all for now.